Silly season has begun. We got a couple of trades to break down around the NHL from the weekend. Is Brad Treliving close to making a deal as well? And I've got my top 5 Leafs draft targets for the upcoming NHL draft. All that more coming up on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, along with my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Busy weekend in the NHL, Dave. Silly season is here. We've got trades coming out the wazoo. We've got a couple that have actually gone through. We've got some, 3 or so that are being reported and haven't quite gone through yet. Some complications. We'll talk about all of those today. And where's Brad at? The Maple Leafs are not in any of these deals. What's going on? You got RyJo getting shipped out to Colorado for Galchenyuk for $4 million AAV. Where the heck Brad at on that one? Come on. So we'll talk a little bit about if the Maple Leafs can get themselves involved in the trade market as well. And I've got my top five draft targets for the Maple Leafs. They sit at 28th overall. I've got 5 players who I think would be worthy enough of that 28th selection if they stick and pick, which we'll also debate a little bit later on today. But why don't we start with the big news that's been going around the NHL, a couple of trades that have officially been completed. And we'll start with the first one that kind of started the party, I guess, and that's with Ryan Johansen going to Colorado for Alex Galchenyuk, the Predators retaining 50% of Johansen's contract. So for this year and next, RyJo, a Colorado Avalanche, for just $4 million worth of cap space. They got themselves their number 2 center, I would say, behind Nate MacKinnon, that to fill that old void that's been left by Nazem Kadri.
Yeah, I mean, I was like looking, and it's one of those trades where you look and you're just like, all right, for Alex Galchenyuk and just Alex Galchenyuk, like
just pure cap dump, just a pure cap dump. And but the fact that they were able to also get him at 50%, though, that is honestly a trade that, I don't know, like lots of teams could have used a Ryan Johansen. I don't believe he had any trade protection or anything like that because Nashville just doesn't believe in that.
He did have trade protection. I think he had a modified no trade clause. I'm not going to.
Did he? Was he the first player?
He did not. You were right. He did not have any protection.
Yeah, like Nashville don't play that way. Nashville just doesn't. They don't play those games. I think maybe Duchesne got one, and I think maybe eventually they started to give out a couple. But for a long time, they just didn't. They didn't hand out any type of trade protection so that they couldn't handcuff themselves. And so they needed to get some money off the books, and they do that by moving out Ryan Johansen to Colorado. Look, that's a hell of a pickup, man, for that team to bring in Ryan Johansen. I know that last year didn't quite have a banner season, but the season prior, he was terrific. 30-goal scorer, multi-time 30-goal scorer. He's a terrific two-way guy, and he's just going to fit in so perfectly, slot in as their number 2 center behind Nate MacKinnon. That was a shrewd move by Colorado to kind of snoop around and see what they could do. And I am a little jealous that Brad Treliving didn't snoop and maybe give a little better than a Galchenyuk return. I would have been willing to give up an asset if I was the Maple Leafs to get RyJo as the second line center at $4 million for this year and next. Would have been a terrific pickup for the Maple Leafs. And weird too, interdivisional trade as well. You don't typically see those type of transactions. But hey, Ryan Johansen's now Colorado Avalanche, and the Preds have a lot more cap space to do, I don't know what with. Probably going to read. What does this say about the Predators to you? They traded Granlund at the deadline. They traded away Ryan Johansen. Was Nino Niederreiter with them also last year?
Traded him to the Jets.
Traded him to the Jets. Do you think this is there's rumors out there that potentially UC Saros could be had? They're listening on UC Soros. Like, are they just going to go in a bit of a retool, rebuild here with Barry Trotz taking over?
I think so. I think, like they've been spinning in the mud a little bit here the last few years. Like they haven't progressed. I would say as a team, like the Ely Tolvanen situation, that was just a terrible, terrible mismanagement of that. Placed the guy on waivers, resurrects his career with Seattle. They used to be like the factory for defensemen, right? They could draft whichever defenseman they wanted. That player was going to just go through the ranks, take their time, and be a bona fide stud NHL D-man. They really haven't done that either. And I think up front, like they still have the same problem where they just don't have, other than Forsberg, like they don't have that elite production up front. So I think this is just, a bit of a cleanse, but in a way that they don't want to take too many steps back, right? Like Nashville doesn't seem to me like a team that wants to do a full rebuild, because when you have Roman Josi signed to that sort of deal, you have Forsberg signed, you can't do that, right?
Shane's there as well.
Like I think they're going to try to go the route of like the LA Kings or the Rangers, kind of kind of weave through what they don't want to keep around, see if they can move that off, and kind of replenish a little bit.
Well, perfect transition, because the LA Kings also struck a deal over the weekend. Sean Durzi, former Toronto Maple Leafs draft pick, traded to the Arizona Coyotes for a 2024 second round pick. What'd you make of this deal, Dave?
I mean, it was a shrewd move by Arizona, right, to kind of swoop in there and use their draft capital. Like they've been stockpiling all these picks.
Yeah. You'll finally, trade for a player that will play for them, not one that just chuck on LTIR.
Right, because I mean, it's bad enough that they have the LTIR team of the century, right? That they are actually getting players that will play in the NHL next year. Yeah, that was like obviously you can't hate on Arizona for what they picked up, because that they basically flipped Christian Dvorak into Sean Durzi. It's not bad management of assets there. Like that's the thing, they can make those sort of deals, but
they got a first round pick out of that too. It's like a first round pick and Sean Durzi, because that pick for Dvorak, I think, was like a first rounder and something else.
Yeah, it was a 2022 first round pick plus the I think it was the first. I think it was a conditional pick. I think that's
third or something like that.
Yeah, and then I think it turned. I think it changed into a different pick after the fact, but
Okay.
Or it was a first and a second. I think that's what the deal ended up being, a first and a second. So I mean, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good way to flip things around, because like if you're Arizona, you can draft a bunch of players, but again, if you have the draft capital, especially when you have multiple picks in the early rounds, trade one of those to get someone that's a little more, ahead, right? That's what, Ottawa tried to do when they did the Brinkett trade, but I think they just, as a team, were not ready for that sort of trade. At least Durzi is a younger player. He's I think he has one more year left on his deal, but he's still an RFA after that. So it's something that they can build with going forward.
And they need players who they have under club control, because I don't know if they're going to be able to attract a whole lot of UFAs out to Mullet Arena. The interesting part about this trade, though, is that it sounds like it could have just be a precursor to open up some more cap space for another trade. When we get back, we'll tell you a couple trades that are in the hopper that might have hit some snags, but still could go through, because there's, 3 of them right now that are still reported with some pretty big names, including one in LA with probably the biggest name of them all. So we'll tell you about those trades in just a moment. But first, let me tell you about one of today's show sponsors. It's our pals at eBay Motors. A championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with their vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for green checks. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti. We are a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast here. You can find us wherever you get your pods at, also up on YouTube. We appreciate all of our everydayers who are subscribed and join us. And if you're new and you enjoy what you're listening to and you want to stay locked in on what's going on, not only NHL, but with the Toronto Maple Leafs, make sure you are subscribed. Hit the little notification bell as well to be notified when we drop new episodes each day. So there's a few other trades that have been reported that are kind of in the hopper, a couple that have hit some snags. But why don't we start the one that we kind of teased there, just stemming off of the Sean Durzi conversation, how it seems as though it could be a precursor to a much bigger deal, clearing out some cap space here with Durzi. The name Pierre-Luc Dubois is being heavily linked to the LA Kings. What have you been seeing there, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, we know that Dubois has given the Jets an ultimatum here that he's not going to resign. So trade me now and trade me to a place where I might potentially sign long term, and you'll get something back in exchange. So we heard a lot about Montreal, and because he's a Quebec native, he'd like to go back home. But then not too long ago, I was listening to 32 Thoughts, and Elliot Friedman brought up the LA Kings as a team that would be aggressive to go after Dubois. And it seems like, and there's the Athletic. The name is escaping me right now. He writes for the Jets for the Athletic. Says that pretty much they really are pushing for a deal to get done between the Kings and the Jets. And it's Murat. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's saying basically the Kings are looking at the deal. The thing about this trade, though, is the Kings are going to want some sort of idea of what that contract would look like. So first off, the Jets have to give permission, which I don't think
technically nothing could be signed until July 1st either, right?
Yeah.
It's like similar to the Austin Matthews and William Nylander situation where, you could probably get a desk deal done where it's tucked away and you can sign it July 1st. But yeah, it would be beneficial for the LA Kings and the Jets because you'll get a lot more for Pierre-Luc Dubois if this comes as a sign-in trade as opposed to just a flat-out trade for a rental here. You could probably, get picks and prospects. Like, could they be willing to put, like a Quentin Byfield into this deal to get a Pierre-Luc Dubois? I mean, you look at what this trade would do for the Kings. Man, that might be this could be the best 1-2-3 punch down the middle in the NHL. Anze Kopitar, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and then you got Phil Deneau as your third line center. Like, can you really find a better trio in the NHL? That's going to be so tough to play against, not only in the offensive zone, but all three of those guys are also pretty reliable defensively as well.
Well, that's the thing. They're all responsible centermen. Dubois seems he's been turning the corner, right? Like, he flirted with 30 goals the last season with Winnipeg. We know that he's a big dude, it's tough to play against. So yeah, I mean, for LA, it'd be a murder's row of centers there, right? Especially if they're able to keep Quinn Byfield. If they don't trade him in that deal, that's someone that can grow into that center role. But
yeah. They've got so many prospects that they could trade. Like, they've got an abundance of prospects there. They've done it well. They've done it right. They've drafted, they've developed some guys, and they've also been able to retain some of their players as well. And now they got a pretty good thing going, right? A really good thing going with the LA Kings. I think, they've been a team that has really been able to retool pretty darn quickly. They even got Alex Turcotte too, who was another top 5 pick who just hasn't quite turned out. Both he and Byfield at this point haven't been anywhere near what they were expected to become, both of which expected to become, bona fide top 6 centermen in the NHL, and neither have been able to establish themselves of that. So could one of those two players be involved in this deal for Pierre-Luc Dubois, give them a change of scenery and head to Winnipeg, which would also give Winnipeg, young players with a lot of control, similarly to what's going on in Arizona. There's not a whole lot of attractiveness about signing in Winnipeg either. So if you can get some young players and they go through a bit of a retool, rebuild, Those would be some two guys I'd be asking about, and I'd be starting if I were the Kings. Gabe Vilardi, another player. If I was the Jets, I'd be asking on. So one of those three, I would assume, would have to be the centerpiece coming back in any Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, along with picks and maybe some other little goodies as well. So we'll see. That trade seems to be picking up some steam, according to some insiders. Could end up coming to fruition. We're recording right now. It's about 5:00 on Sunday. Maybe it goes through by the time you're listening to this, but that would be a terrific pickup for the Kings and just the start of what I think will end up being a teardown for the Winnipeg Jets. Speaking of teardowns, the Philadelphia Flyers have also been very busy. Danny Briere is working the phones like he's Kyle Dubas on the draft floor. Man's got 2 phones like he's Kevin Gates. It's insane. The things that he has kind of percolating right now. So the big one that was interesting, let me know if you've got more information on this one, or if you want to explain the holdup with the St. Louis Blues trade. I think you've been reading up on it a little bit.
Yeah. So basically, the Blues are looking to land Kevin Hayes from the Flyers, and apparently Travis Sanheim might also be included in that deal too. Obviously, those are two pretty significant pieces coming from Philadelphia. I think Hayes has another few years left at just over $7 million. So
and Sanheim signed at 6.5 like 2 years ago.
Yeah, so those are some big numbers there for St. Louis. Yeah, they've got some cap space, but they also need to move out some contracts, and that's apparently where the issue in the trade is. I think both Pierre LeBrun and Ellie Freeman both reported that Torrey Krug was asked to waive his no trade clause because that's the player that Briere was targeting, and that the Blues wanted to move away. And he's saying basically he's not willing to move it to waive his no trade clause. Again, this is the issue when you give players a no trade clause, because if you want to trade them down the road, they got every right to say no. And so I think Krug has 3 years. 4 years left at $6.5 million a year. So that's significant money you're trying to move out there. And he's dealt with some injury issues, but still a decent offensive defenseman. Not exactly young, so I'm not sure what the Flyers' motivation was.
This feels like a cap dump for St. Louis. Yeah. They're like, we need to move salary to bring these guys in, so you have to take on some salary. We're willing to dump you, Torrey Krug, and maybe you can rehabilitate him or try and find another taker for Krug and get another asset that way, which still I think is what Briere is trying to do. The latest I saw was Briere's trying to find, a third team that Krug might be interested in going to, so they can still make that big blockbuster deal with Kevin Hayes and Travis Sanheim. But if they can't make that work and Krug wants to stick around in St. Louis, I believe the Kevin Hayes trade will still go down. It just won't be as big. Sanheim won't be included, but Hayes should still end up in St. Louis when all is said and done. But then I saw a report, speaking of Travis Sanheim, if that trade does not happen, that apparently a few teams have now kicked tires on Sanheim. So it's not just St. Louis who's interested in bringing him in. A few teams, one of which, according to David Pagnotta, is our own Toronto Maple Leafs. What do you make of that report of the Leafs kicking tires on old Travis Sanheim?
I mean, we know that the Leafs have been trying to find a way to improve their blue line. I didn't think that Travis Sanheim would be the target per se, just because, I know he's got a little bit more size to him. He's been a decent defensive defenseman. He's not someone that moves the needle offensively in many ways, but he's an interesting player. I just, at that price of I would hope, I don't know if that's a deal where Philly takes back salary, which I can't see because that contract just started. So he's making 6.25. That to me is a lot for Travis Sanheim.
I agree. I would want no part of this if I am the Maple Leafs. I kind of cringed when I read that the Leafs were kicking tires on Sanheim. If you're willing to spend $6 million on a defenseman, I wouldn't be going shopping at that for Travis Sanheim. That's for darn sure. That's not where I'd be wanting to go there. Would they be willing to retain some salary? I mean, if you could get him at 50% retained, then okay. Now we're talking.
That's
But I don't. That'd be a lot. Like there's a
that's
lot
8
of
years.
years.
That's 8 years of retention. Like I don't.
Yeah,
And the Flyers probably don't even have that many retention slots. Like you only get 3.
yeah. They
So,
already used it on Provorov. I'd be curious to see if this Kevin Hayes deal has any retention involved in it. That's a
yeah.
pretty big ticket to go to St. Louis if Krug's not coming back. Yeah, we'll see. That's going to be interesting. But yeah, I really hope that the Leafs do not go in on Travis Sanheim. There's a long list of defensemen who I think are cheaper options that could be just as good as Travis Sanheim would be, and not be tied to this guy for 8 years at a very high cap hit. So I really hope we don't wake up in the next couple of days and learn that the Leafs have sprung for Sanheim at full pop. That would not be the best first trade for Brad Treliving. Sleepy Brad, as we're now calling him, because everyone else apparently is making all these moves, and Brad Treliving just sitting there in the weeds, making nothing happen. I guess he's calling, though, up according to Pagnotta. He did kick some tires on Sanheim and also Hannafin, which we kind of expected to happen, but that was part of Pagnotta's report. I am curious, though, Dave, like, do you believe that maybe Treliving is a little behind on the trade market? And I look at that Johansen trade a little bit and think like, where was Treliving on that one? Where you look at it and you're just thinking to yourself, he's had so much to do since he became general manager. He had to fly out to Arizona. He was worried about meeting with Matthews, meeting with Keefe, and then he finally last week, sat down. They had their pro scout meetings, and then they're getting into the amateur scouts with the draft coming up. Like, to you, do you think maybe, for them not being as active in this little flurry of trades that's going on right now, could that potentially be as a result of him being a little behind the ball because he was hired late and there was just so much to get to that maybe he was just, not making as many phone calls as maybe Kyle would have been able to do if he would have known the team? Like, I don't know. You get where I'm kind of going here?
Yeah, I think there's probably some truth to that because he has to get his staff. He probably has to do his scouting meetings to figure out targets too. They're not just going to run in and make those deals right away.
Well, and he's trying to evaluate his own team as well
Exactly.
at the same time. So like he's not even done his own internal evaluation. He's not ready to make trades. Is kind of where I'm going at. Where Kyle, if he was still the GM, he would know exactly what's going on. He would have the vision of what he wants to do, what didn't work last year, what the need for next season, and maybe he could have been involved in some of these discussions.
Yeah, I think it's a tough situation for Brad to come in and just be like, all right, now let's go and make some trades. Like, it's not usually how all those work out, right? And like, you got to be careful with all these flurry of deals going on, like the Sanheim thing. Like, the Flyers are just trying to unload, and they're probably trying to tell teams, you can get this guy at pennies on the dollar. But then you look at the contract and you're just like, well, now we know why it's pennies on the dollar, because it's a terrible contract and that's a long commitment you're going to make. So like you got to be very careful when you're navigating these things. Like if you're making a deal for someone with 1 or 2 years left, that's a little easier to do. But like I can guarantee like that's probably why the St. Louis deal fell apart, because St. Louis's take would be taking on 2 guys who make a pretty penny, and it's not a 1-year thing. It's a multi-year commitment that they're making. So you just got, I think that's probably where Treliving is at. In like, I don't think he's spending all of his time on Austin Matthews. I don't think he's spending all of his time on William Nylander. I think there's a lot to do, and he was hired. What are you going on? A couple weeks now?
Yeah, it's been 3 weeks or so. When was it? Yeah, it was like early June when he was hired, I believe.
Yeah, so like you gotta think that he's gotten somewhat established, right? Like of what he wants to do. I just think maybe there's a target out there that he's waiting to figure out, that maybe that team's not ready to make that deal yet, or they're waiting for usually when certain deals go down, other teams eventually start making their own moves because they're waiting for the market to kind of dictate where things are going.
Well, actually, to go back to what you just said, kind of click something in my head to go back to the Pierre-Luc Dubois thing. If that trade goes down, that takes out what was believed to be a strong suitor in the Austin Matthews sweepstakes if he did become a free agent next year, which actually might work out better for Toronto. If Pierre-Luc Dubois does sign, he's like, all right, well, I guess I probably won't be going to the Kings. Might as well sign with Toronto. I just thought about that. That could be a benefit for the Maple Leafs if they trade and sign Pierre-Luc Dubois long term.
But hey,
Maybe that takes him out of the running.
It's not LA we got to worry about here, Mike. It's the maybe we'll be in Arizona Coyotes.
The Mullet Arena Yotes.
Yeah,
that's one of the teams there. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not particularly worried about a 5,000 seat arena either. That can't even sell out. Not worried about that team at all. New York, maybe, but ultimately, I still see. I mean, I still think that Matthews is going to sign here in Toronto. Is it going to be for 8 years? That I do not know. Probably not. It wouldn't benefit him to sign an 8-year deal. It'd be beneficial for him to sign more of a 3, 4, 5-year term, which I could see happening. But ultimately, I do see him signing here in Toronto. I think that's all signs are kind of pointing to that happening. Will it be on July 1 specifically? Probably not. It seems a little unlikely at this point, but will they sign eventually? I think it's going to happen. I do. Yeah. Nylander is the interesting one here. And as we're talking about trades and whatnot and what happens, are they willing to throw Nylander into those trade discussions if he's unwilling to sign a contract early into the summer? And, before you get to training camp, you gotta know what's going on with him in the future. I would think you don't want another Gaudreau situation where you let, this player walk to free agency. So it should be a very interesting, couple of days here in the NHL. This is where everything happens, right around the draft, free agency. This is how teams reshape their futures and reshape what they're doing for next season. So should be a fun, busy time. I think, you know what? Why don't we save the draft stuff for tomorrow's show, Dave? Because I think we're already getting almost at a half hour here, and I've got a lot of notes. So I think we could probably make it a full draft special maybe for tomorrow's show. So why don't we kind of just leave it there? Let us know in the comment section down below, though. What is there a player out there that you're hoping, just praying, hoping that that Brad Treliving gets into the sweepstakes for and strikes a deal and makes his first big trade as Leafs general manager? Let us know the names that you're kind of looking into in the comment section down below. All right, buddy. Good stuff, fun stuff. It's silly season. Everything's going wacko. We'll reconvene here tomorrow and do a little bit more draft talk with the draft coming up this week as well. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all podcasts and platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti. Follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. Go ahead, smash that like button if you're here watching on YouTube. Also leave a comment for us down below, your thoughts on today's show. And we'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. We'll get into some draft discussion. My top 5 draft targets for the Maple Leafs at pick 28. Will they even make that selection? We'll also debate the merit of that tomorrow as well. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.